Welcome to Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. These are the stories of those who have received, given, and who are waiting for the gift of life, organ transplantation. Now here's your host and heart and kidney recipient, BJ Odom.
Welcome to the Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast, a place where we journey through the incredible world of organ transplantation. I'm your host, BJ Odom. Each week, we uncover inspiring stories and meet extraordinary individuals who are connected to the world of transplants. Remember to support us by leaving that 5-star review and subscribing on your preferred podcast platform. Don't forget to join us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And you can also email us anytime. Maybe you've got a story you want to hear, or you just want to comment on a particular show. You can do that at giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. In this episode 30, Stephen and I will open up and talk about our personal experiences with congenital heart defects at childhood. Stephen Grace, a true warrior, shares a remarkable journey of living with a hole in his heart and ultimately receiving the gift of life, a heart transplant. So let's kick things off by getting to know a little bit more about you, Stephen Grace.
Yeah, so again, my name is Stephen Grace. I'm 34 years old, live in the Triad in North Carolina, more specifically the High Point, Thomasville area. And I received my gift, heart transplant, April 19th. 2020, right in the height of the pandemic. We'll get into that here in a few minutes, but more about myself. I'm 34 years old. I've been married to my beautiful wife, Kelsey, since 2010. We have two beautiful daughters, 12 and 6, and live in a house full of girls with two girl pets as well. So you can imagine the craziness that goes on in my life. Even the girl pets have their own personalities, so it's just a full house. And I am a funeral director and crematory operator now. After I went back to work after transplant, before that I was in the restaurant industry for 15 years.
Oh, that takes a toll on your body for sure.
Absolutely.
Now,
absolutely.
Yeah, because I owned a pizza restaurant just before actually my kidneys went out. And that was, I don't actually blame it, but I mean, that was a endeavor that I was not used to for sure, because I was in radio most of my life and got out of radio for a while, said, let me try to open a pizza shop. And boy, that was a life-changing experience for sure.
Absolutely. I was in the barbecue world, here in North Carolina. We're kind of known for barbecue, and we did barbecue and ribs and country cooking, and we had a catering portion of the company. And so it was 6 days a week, just full on all the time. And, I thoroughly missed the restaurant days. I had a wonderful boss who's like a second father to me. And it was a good time in my life. But I'm now, like I said, a funeral director. And I got a lot of reasons why I got into it was because of my transplant and helping families that, lose their loved ones. And in that process, their loved ones became heroes when they decided to, give their organs and donate to people like me and you.
That's quite a jump from the restaurant business to the funeral home business for sure. And now
Absolutely.
Now you did this after your heart transplant, right? That's when you got into the funeral business?
Yeah. So when I had to stop working, due to my heart and due to my heart just failing and getting to a point I couldn't work anymore in 2019, sitting at home and I was like, man, I really need to go to school for something or do something where I'm just sitting around. And I've always had a passion to help others, but I was also kind of intrigued with like the morgue and what happened to our bodies when we pass away. And so I said, and I knew a couple people that were in the funeral industry, just kind of working services and helping out on opening doors and that kind of stuff for people. And, so why not? Let's just pursue it. So I just jumped into school and got my degree in that. And then once I received the transplant and started working, then I decided to go into it full time.
Cool. Well, let me ask you, what is your story as far as, obviously you had a bad heart. Is this something from birth, from medical problems later, in your life? Or when did it begin? How did your story begin, actually?
Yeah. So I was born with a congenital heart defect. I had a hole in my heart, which, is pretty common. But the doctors, I was born in Fort Myers, Florida, down close to your way, at Lee Memorial Hospital, which I guess is either, I don't live there now, so I don't think it's either there anymore or is renamed. But the doctors kind of felt like I would be born with a heart defect. And so they were prepared when I came out. And when I was born, again, I according to my mom, I wasn't eating. I was sleeping all the time. And they wanted me to get to about 10 pounds, but I never would get there. So about 6 months in after birth, Mom just got, extremely worried and, went in and talked to the cardiologist, Dr. Tucker, and said, "Hey, we need to figure this out. We need to look into this." And so they went in and they did confirm that, they kind of knew there was a hole just based on reports that they were getting, but they didn't know the severity of it until they went in to that after I was 6 months old, and they realized that the hole was a lot bigger and more severe than they ever would have imagined. So they had to do a lot of patchwork, and I actually coded right there on the table. My heart just kind of gave out, and so at 6 months old, they implanted a pacemaker to help my heart, and they kind of knew right then and there that I would be pacemaker dependent. And so they put that in, but from then until, throughout my toddler young life, I was in and out of the hospital, having a lot of different procedures and issues with the heart and new pacemakers and moving it, from the stomach to my chest as I kind of got a little bigger. But after that, things kind of evened out. I moved back up to High Point area in North Carolina, which is where my mom was from. And our surgeon at the time and Dr. Tucker actually moved to Winston-Salem and headed up the pediatric cardiology department at Baptist Hospital. And that's what brought us back. And so, I just went through my childhood, checking on the pacemaker, keeping an eye on my heart, kind of doing, once I kind of got through that toddler stage and some, and my body kind of evened out a little bit, my heart kind of evened out, I was doing well, just living the life of a kid and, with a pacemaker, but doing the best I could.
Now, I too also was born with a bad heart, and so I never was able to play sports or anything. Now, were you able to participate in sports, or what level of physicality were you like?
Yeah, so I've never been in, what people would call in shape. I was never to really excel physically. I did play some sports. I was in baseball. I love the game of baseball and basketball. When I was young, I was in gymnastics. But I had to stop doing that. I had to be cautious with the pacemaker, with leads, and you can't, put your arm out and stretch those wires, or you can't have a lot of heavy, impact. So I could never play like impact sports like football or do any kind of wrestling of that nature. But, I did live a pretty healthy, an active lifestyle growing up as a kid all the way through my teenage years. And then that's when I started having problems again. I noticed my sophomore and junior and most of my senior years, I got to a point where I was always sleeping and tired and lethargic. I mean, to the point I was getting grounded. My parents were getting upset with me. I was, not doing my chores and sleeping at school. So I was getting in trouble at school, and they thought I was just a lazy kid, lazy teenager. But then my senior year, I was 18 years old. I went to a normal checkup. They did a echogram, heart echogram, angiogram, and noticed that I had went into or developed dilated cardiomyopathy. So, that's where the heart is enlarged. And that's due to the leakage of that. When they went in and repaired that hole when I was 6 months old, it had opened back up and was leaking. The blood was leaking back into my heart at 18 years old. And my heart had got, they tried to admit me that day to do a heart valve repair and replace of different valves. And stop me at any time if I'm not making sense.
Oh no, you're making sense. At least to me, as a child that went through a lot of heart issues myself, you're making perfect sense to me.
Yeah, well, I was at this doctor's, and I can remember it clearly. My dad and I were sitting there, and the doctor came in, and she said, "Stephen, this is what's going on. And your heart is so enlarged, we need to admit you right now, and look at doing your aortic valve and tricuspid valve need to be replaced or repaired. And so we're going to go ahead and schedule this." And I said, "Hold up, doc, wait a minute. I'm a week from graduating high school. I have camp the week after that, or 2 weeks after that, and the week before that, I'm supposed to be going to I wasn't Disney World, but it was a theme park. Mm-hmm. Can't remember which one." And I said, "Doc, I'm not missing any of those three events." And she said, "Well, you really are pretty bad off. We need to admit you." And I said, "Doc, if I'm going to die, I'm going to die, but I'm going to go to those three events first."
Now, did you go to those three events, or did your parents
Absolutely.
talk you out of it? Oh, you did. All right.
No, I did it. I graduated. Okay. I went to the theme park with my grandma on a trip, and my family. And then I went to camp. It was church camp. It was the best camp I had ever, till this day, I wish I could go back to this camp. But best believe the day I got back, I remember getting back on a Friday afternoon from camp. I was admitted that Friday evening to the hospital to have my surgeries. So that was a fun and exciting but scary time, as you can imagine, at 18 years old.
No kidding. You're just starting,
Yes.
You're graduating from high school, like most kids are starting their lives. And that's, when your adulthood begins and you're having a major surgery, that had to be, topsy-turvy, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. So they ended up replacing my aortic valve of the old heart and with a cadaver valve, with human valve. The pig valve or the artificial valves were not a good option. And then they repaired the tricuspid valve at that time. And so, I was admitted, and I was in the hospital for about a week. And my then girlfriend, who is now my wife, like I said, we've been married since 2010, and I graduated. We were high school sweethearts. I graduated in 2008. So that's, that was at that time. And she actually stayed with me in the hospital for about 2 of those nights, just as we were dating.
Oh, wow.
As young kids. And so I knew then and there it was probably the right choice to marry that girl, so here we are 14 years later.
And because, really,
and she's still by my side.
When you think about it, a lot of women would have probably, and I can't believe my wife is still with me too, with all the problems I've had through life. But, someone that's, that age, around the, 18, 19 years old, and you going through that, she is a wonderful woman for not running. Because you got to think deep down, there's probably a lot of girls that would, at that point in time in their life, would probably go, whoa, I need to run. But she was right
Absolutely.
there by your side. So that is amazing, young man.
Absolutely. She had to become a caretaker at 18 years old and, helping me use the bathroom and get around and whatever. That had to take a lot. So, and she knew she was in for a wild ride, and she still stuck it out and, stayed with me. And so, I have to praise her for that. And, but to continue on, with the kind of the journey that have been on so far, after that, surgery, that open heart, it took me a little while to recover. I didn't go to college right away. But then, I felt better, had a lot more energy. And so things kind of improved. I still had my pacemaker, but nothing happened physically with my heart for several years. Matter of fact, it wasn't until 2016 that I started having issues again. At this point, 2016, I was 26 years old. I remember like it was yesterday. My wife and I were walking to Sunday school in our church, and I had a cup of coffee in my hand, and all of a sudden I just passed out. It was Father's Day of 2016. I'll never forget that. And so, luckily we had some paramedics, in our church. And so one of them got to me pretty quickly, sent me to the hospital, and, we realized my pacemaker was kind of giving out. So they replaced it and put a pacemaker defibrillator combo in, and realized that at that time, that's when we realized I was in systolic heart failure. The heart had just finally started giving back out due to the leakage and just the extra strain that's been on my heart all my life. And for those, I know this is a podcast for transplants, so a lot of medical terminology goes on, but systolic heart failure just means the left ventricle of my heart was weakened and just could not pump at the rate that it needed to keep me healthy.
Basically, what it done, it just had worn out. It's kind of like my circumstances too. My heart just finally, it was like if you could see a hand throwing his hands, I'm going, I can't do no more. I've done all I can do. I'm done.
Absolutely. Absolutely is what happened. It was given out. So, I know a lot of people that go through these heart transplants. It's like a medical mishap or just something just all of a sudden onset, and it just kind of happens, and it forces you in the hospital and get on the transplant list. But that just wasn't the case with me. It was a long time coming. And just a long time, my heart, even though it was weak, it was a fighter. It lasted a long time. I mean, we knew that it had issues since birth. So, I give God the glory for it lasting as long as it did. And so 2018, once we knew we were in heart failure, obviously 2016 is when we realized it. So they put me on different medicines, to try to strengthen it. There was Entresto, there was Enapral, there was several different medications, because they try to get you as far as you can before talking transplant or going on a transplant list, because that kind of starts a clock on your life, basically.
Yes.
And so they want to get you as old as possible so you can enjoy as much as possible.
Now, let me ask you a question. And because I was, I had a bad heart at birth too. So do you think, and this is only, probably speculation on both of our points, but I felt I had an easier time going through all of this because I was kind of used to it. Do you feel the same way? Or do you think, well, obviously you could have been healthy up until the time, only maybe a year before your life would have been totally different. But I think in a way it kind of helped me face the fact that I needed a heart transplant. How about with you?
Yeah, no. So to me, it was just a part of life.
Yeah.
Growing up, it was just one thing that God makes us all go through different things. And that was my life. It was just normal to me almost, so going to the doctors and having the echoes and all the different tests and examinations, I knew it wasn't normal because not everybody else wasn't going through it. I have a twin brother. He didn't have to go through it. He had no heart issues, but it was just my normal, so, I just kind of go with the flow. And, half the time I didn't know what exactly was going on. The doctor would say, well, this is wrong. And I'm just like, all right, well, fix it.
Yeah, let's get her done. That was
do.
me. Yeah, let's do what we need to do.
Yeah, just keep on going. Do it. You're the expert. I'm not. I know I don't feel good, but you know how to fix me, so let's do it. So that's kind of that was my mentality growing up. And I just did as much as I could and, to try to be a normal, kid and teenager throughout that process. And so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. And I know exactly, not exactly, but I know pretty much how you feel, because even when I go to the hospital now, I go, it's just another day at the office for me. And, I have a neighbor that recently had to go into the hospital with some heart issues. And he even told his wife, which, related back to my wife, how BJ does this, I have not a clue in the world. This is like, the roughest thing I've ever went through. And, it's not even a heart transplant. And I'm just thinking, yep, another day at the office for me. That's kind of my catchphrase.
Well, and that kind of idea and thoughts, especially with all the blood draws and, all of the what I call the free hospital wax jobs with all the leads that go on your chest for all the exams, and they tear them off, you got chest hair and everything else. And people are like, how do you put up with that? How do you, and I'm just like, hey, I just look at it as a wax job. We keep on going, or when they're drawing blood, it's, the vampires are attacking again. It's just my daily attack,
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask you a couple questions that are kind of like out of left field maybe, but as I went through my journey, I'm trying to compare my journey with yours. And I think this is a good opportunity for us both to maybe, analyze this situation. Now, your wife, she's there. She loves you. Now, I actually was with my second wife. My son is with my first wife. My daughter is with my second wife. I know herself and her mother especially were very worried when it was time, for us to have that child. How was your mother and your in-laws when your wife got pregnant? Because they knew you had all these issues from birth. Did it bother them or did it worry them? And how did you navigate through that portion of your life?
Yeah, so it definitely worried my wife and I. And when it came time to us having our daughter, I never really asked my in-laws or my parents, what they thought about it. That we come from both families are strong Christian believers. And, we all know that God has plans. And so I don't know how worried that they were, and if they were, they didn't really say a whole lot. Maybe not to worry us, but when we did get pregnant, and the first thing I told her doctor was, look, I have these issues. We need to stay on top of our child's, and make sure my daughter is not going to have the problems that I did. And if so, we need to get on it. Mm-hmm. So throughout the pregnancy, that first pregnancy, and the second, we went to extra doctors, and, they would perform different tests to make sure, even in the womb, they could tell if the baby was developing heart issues, and they are perfect. They never developed anything. So, that was such a relief to know that I wasn't passing that on to my children.
Good deal. Now, also, how old were they when you got your transplant, and how did they navigate through it?
Yeah. So back to the transplant part, I was put on the transplant, and before I get to that, I'll kind of tell you how we got to the transplant. Okay. 2018 is when we finally decided it was time to go on the list. And so I waited almost 2.5 years on that list. I started at Wake Forest Baptist Medical on their list, and then for 2 years, but their program is a smaller program, nothing wrong with it. I praise them all the time. But I knew if I was going to get a heart transplant and continue surviving, because I was getting worse and worse, and I needed to go to a bigger program. So that's when I moved to Duke, the end of 19, closer to the end of 19. And they actually, at that time, 2019, is when, I don't know if you ever heard of the DCD program.
No, I have not.
But there was a trial, Heart in a Box, that they were doing nationally, and they had just started it. And so I was able to get in that trial program, which led to me receiving my transplant April 19th, 2020. So I only waited 6 months.
Now, if you can explain a little bit, is that like a heart outside the body, or what are we talking with the heart in a box? Yeah.
So the DCD, the DCD program, or Heart in a Box program, is so at this time, up until this, heart transplants, when they received the heart, it was from somebody who was brain dead. And that's how they received the hearts. But by doing that, you had such a small time frame, of getting the heart from place to place to receive that heart for the new person. And so, it's about a 4-hour window, so many miles that they could go, because that organ was placed on ice during transport. But this Heart in a Box, it was a new device that allowed doctors, even after the heart stopped beating, so somebody in a wreck, or for whatever the reason, the heart was no longer beating, they were able to hook the heart up in this box and restart the heart with the donor's blood and different medications, and allow it to continue beating during transport, which, by doing this, allowed doctors to go even further out to receive these hearts, and the heart was in better quality of shape by the time it received, the donor or the donee received it, because it wasn't stopped for an extended amount of time.
Wow, it's amazing. It's amazing what they do today.
It really is, and it was in trial phases when I was going through it, and that's actually this is kind of, to get into my story, this kind of how God works, and I'm sorry if I'm not sorry that I'm mentioning God, because if it wasn't for Him, I wouldn't be here. But
not a problem at all.
This is how He works. The heart that I received on April 19th. Was in 2 other bodies before mine. So I actually have two donors. the original person passed away. And in this situation, when that person, the original donor, passed, this was the heart had already stopped. And so they were able to use the heart in a box technology for the trial. And so they restarted the heart and, transported it. The heart was a perfect match for myself and for somebody else. And so the other recipient was higher status, which meant they were worse off. And so they received the heart. But within 24 hours, unfortunately, my second donor suffered a massive stroke while still in ICU and was not going to survive. And so that kind of changed. So when they tested the heart, it was still perfect. And so they again was able to try to reuse it. And the Duke had never done this before, according to them. They called me and told me the story of the heart, which they said they never do. But they had to find out if I would be interested, knowing that this heart has been in two other bodies. But of course, I took it. I was like, I'm not going to pass this opportunity up. You never know if you're going to receive another opportunity, as you know.
Yeah.
So they took the heart out of this person, the second person, and put it in me, gave it to me. So my heart was in 3 different bodies in a 48-hour span, which was, as you can imagine, pretty wild.
Yeah. In all honesty, this is the first time that, I've done quite a bit of research, and, I've been doing this podcast now for a while, and, I'm 21 years out, and that is the first time I have ever heard of this. So this is pretty wild stuff, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it's something that's really neat, and it's an honor to have 2 different donors, but it's definitely unexpected, and so it's just a wild and cool story. But that's my story, and I received it. As a matter of fact, when I got the call, I'll always remember it. The night before, it was Friday night. My daughter and I camped outside. She wanted to sleep in a tent, and this tent was made for one person. But me and my daughter, she was maybe 8. She was determined. She wanted to sleep outside. So we did it, slept outside, slept horribly. Came in about 6:30 Saturday morning, sat in my recliner for a few minutes, and I dozed off. And that's when I received the call. And Dr. DeVore called me and said that he had something to tell me. And I said, if this is the call that I'm thinking, I need you to not say anything, and I need you to call me back in 5 minutes. So I hung up on him.
Well, now, why did you? I know you're going to tell me, but why did you do this?
Well, 1, I was tired, but 2, I was like, I had to prepare myself mentally about this call that I was getting ready to receive, because, I've been waiting 2.5 years.
Uh-huh.
And that call is on a Saturday morning. I'm not expecting, anything on a weekend. So when that number pops up on a weekend, you kind of know what this could be. And so I guess I wasn't prepared. I wanted my wife to be around. She was upstairs. And so I wanted my daughter away from me, because I didn't know what kind of emotions I would have. And so I just hung up on the doctor. Kelsey said, "You just did what?" I said, "I hung up on him. He's calling to tell me the news, but I promise he's going to call me back."
Now, when you said you didn't want your daughter there because you didn't know how you'd respond, I'm going to ask the $1 million question. Yeah. How did you respond?
I didn't believe it was really him telling me that. I took it better than I thought it would. I wasn't as emotional. I guess I felt relief that the call had actually came in. My wife was crying, so I uncontrollably, I guess a fear of excitement, of nervousness. And so he called back, and we had that conversation, It was a whirlwind of a conversation, as you can imagine, as you remember when you had yours.
Now, not to take away from you, but quickly, I was actually in the hospital when I got the news, and my wife was in Fort Myers. I was in Tampa, and I remember calling her saying, "They got me a heart. Get the family together and come on up." And I was excited as could be, but as of course, a spouse would be, and not really going through all this stuff. She was worried and scared, and she said, okay. So I didn't really get to see her response. She more or less got a call like in the middle of the night saying, get the family together and come on up because tomorrow morning's the day. That's how she got the news, unfortunately. But that's
oh, wow.
That was our way. So she, grabbed my son and our daughter, and she made her way to Tampa.
Well, I received that call, but he told me that they were still doing all the tests and everything else, that they would call me back later that afternoon to kind of confirm, to tell me when to come. And so all day we were getting prepared. And then about 4:00 that afternoon, they called me and told me that the situation had changed and that the heart was no longer going to be a part of the trial. And so that they had to rescind the offer.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so you can imagine the emotions that I had from getting the call, preparing for the call, and then all of a sudden being told that they were rescinding it due to technicality and having to leave the program. But the doctor felt like I would still have a good chance of receiving the heart, but they did have to open it back up. And so all night I was up, praying and yelling and crying and, just all the emotions that you can think of. But it was the next morning they called me back about 6:00 Sunday morning saying, hey, the heart's still yours if you want it. So I immediately left for Duke. I had to be there. This was about 7:00. I had to be there by noon. Now, let's take a step back and realize that this was year 2020 and April 2020, the height of the pandemic of COVID. So not only did I wait 2.5 years for my heart, but I went to receive this heart during COVID, during a worldwide pandemic, to add another wrinkle into what was going on.
Now, was your family allowed in or let's?
They were not. They were not. My wife had to drop me off at the front door of Duke University Hospital, and we just said our goodbyes, not knowing if we would see each other again.
Oh, wow.
So the whole time I was there 12 days at Duke, and my family was not allowed in. I was by myself having to deal with this and fight and recover. And so you can imagine, I know we don't have enough time to talk about it, but just that time frame was such a blur for everybody and such uncertainty for everybody. But while dealing with that, also dealing with a heart transplant, and and having no immune system.
Yeah. I know how afraid I was during this time, and I already had my heart and I was at home, but I was, still, we all know how the pandemic went and everything that was out there. I mean, I think we were all freaking out, but to go through this during the pandemic, that had to add to the pressure of the whole situation. I would believe.
It did, and my daughter, she was 8 at the time, or a little 7 or 8. And she was scared, but she was so glad, after 12 days, I finally got to see her, and she wouldn't leave my side for probably 3 weeks, at home. She sat right beside me. My youngest was a year old at the time. And so she didn't know what was going on, obviously, and she was scared of me because I was different than when I left, 12 days prior. Mm-hmm. And so she was scared and didn't know what to do and wouldn't get near me, which was it's understandable.
Heartbreaking, but understandable. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, I couldn't lift anything for up to 6 months. And so, I couldn't hold her. And so that was the hardest part of that. And, just trying to raise 2 children after receiving a heart transplant in the height of COVID. So, but, I got through it. My daughters have gone through a lot, in their young lives, dealing with my heart. They get nervous anytime I have to go to a doctor. But I think it's made them stronger, and we realize the preciousness of life. Even at their young ages, they understand that life is a gift, and they understand that it's a gift from somebody else and from God that I'm still here. So we definitely don't take life for granted.
Yeah, amazing. The whole story has been, truly amazing and very moving, even to me, someone who has had a heart transplant. Now, we all get the chance to write those thank you letters, and sometimes we get responses, sometimes we do not. Have you tried to reach out to meet your family, or have they tried to, where are you, or would you, because I don't know where I was. Back I had mine, I wrote the thank you letter, but I don't know if I really wanted to meet them. But now, after doing this podcast and talking to some donor families, I think I would like to meet them. But where are you in this process?
I would love to meet them one day. I have not wrote my letters out. Every time I go to try to do it, I just can't seem to put the right words on paper. And I know, everybody just says, well, just write a generic thank you. I'm alive because of you. Here's my information, and send it. But I just can't get myself to do it. And I tell myself every year I'm going to do it. So, but my goal is this year. I'm going to get through the holidays. I don't want to do something to a family, have them receive a letter during the holidays, but I think I'm going to wait, and I'm finally going to do it at the beginning of the year, going into my 5-year anniversary. I think I would love to be able to maybe get a response.
Now, I don't know if this will help you or not, but if it does, this is great. But after doing this podcast, actually, I've talked to a few donor families, and I was like you. I was like, how do I write this letter? What do I say? And so I just kind of like you, I kind of made it generic. But after talking to these donor families and learning that a lot of times these letters mean a lot to them. And I talked to a mother who met the gentleman who, received the heart from her son, and how that meeting was so amazing.
Yep.
And so it was, I feel a whole lot different now than I did when I wrote the letters and in the beginning years of my transplant, because like, oh, no way would I want to meet them. But after talking to these donor families, it has changed my mind.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I mean, I can see that. And I would love to at some point be able to do that. I just, just like with this podcast, I almost backed out just because the thought of talking about it or whatever, it just brings, different things up. And, so I get nervous and I shut down. And so,
and it's totally, totally acceptable too, because there has been times I was the same way. And, I did radio all my life too. So I'm kind of, used to, this kind of platform. And so I actually heard another Hollywood star that has another problem say and talk about her podcast about MS and how she thought it was her duty to do it. And then all of a sudden I said, well, I should be doing a podcast about transplants. So that's where this podcast came from. But if I would have never seen her on television, I would have never done it. And the things I've learned over the last 25, 26 episodes, amazing.
Wow. Wow. Well, I've been listening to the episodes, and just listening to the stories so far has really been touching and inspiring. And I'm grateful for you and your podcast and your willingness to have these conversations. So we that are experiencing it know we're not alone in it, and that there's other people out there that know exactly where we are. They know exactly how we feel. Because until you go through it, you don't know. You can think you know, or you can try to relate, but until you go through it, you just don't know.
Right.
And so it's great hearing from others that can be right in your shoes. And so I'm grateful for that.
And we may have had this conversation before. I'm not for sure, but I don't know if I told you about episode 8 where I did talk to a donor family. That's the woman who heard her heartbeat. I mean, it was very emotional for me while I did it. And when I listened back to it, and even now feeling, kind of emotional as I talk about it. But that episode actually, as I was even doing it, pretty much took me to my knees. It was one of those moments where it was such a blessing, but kind of, like I said, it was a little bit hard to get through for me, but it was an amazing episode and probably my favorite.
Wow. Yeah. I had planned to listen to that one in depth. I haven't got to it yet, but that was a goal to do this week, was to listen to it. But, and in your experience with that episode, I've kind of had a similar experience since I've got into the funeral industry. One of my first cases that I helped, one of the first families I had helped, was a young man who passed away tragically in a car accident, and found out that he was a donor, and 18 years old. Lord, that just brings up, making me emotional thinking about it. But
I know.
He came in, and at this time I was just an apprentice, and so I was in charge of logging him in, checking him over, just doing different things that we have to do when we receive loved ones in our care. And I didn't know he was a donor until I got him into our care, and I opened him up, and his organs were gone, and I fell to my knees, and I prayed over that boy, and his family came in, and I couldn't talk to the family at that time. I was too emotional. But a couple of days later, when we had his service, I was able to go up to the mother and father afterwards, and I told them who I was, and I told them that I had a heart transplant. And if it wasn't for somebody like their son, who, yes, their life had come to an end, but they are a hero because they gave life to somebody else. And in doing so, if it wasn't for somebody like that, I wouldn't be around. And so I told them that that allowing him to follow through with his gift by giving life to somebody else, I'm a living example of what he did, even though his life came to an end. But his last act, I'm proof of what it could do. And so that was a very hard and touching moment, and in my career, but also in my life of living as a transplant recipient, and being able to help other families, because even though it was hard for them to hear, they wrote me saying, "Thank you for telling us your story and letting us see what his decision and gift did for somebody else."
And I've had that.
So that was really touching.
I've had that similar, experience, not as you did, but I did stand-up comedy. And I always mentioned that I had a transplant. Did a couple little jokes, nothing off color, but I would do a couple, jokes about it. And this was like shortly after my transplant, maybe 6 months. I was doing a show, one of the first shows I did after my transplants. And I had a big burly guy too. I mean, it looked like he could have killed me if he wanted to. He said, "Did you really have a heart transplant?" And I said, "Yes, sir, I did." And I was just thinking in my mind, oh my God, I hope I didn't offend him. I hope, he's not angry. Hope he's not going to want to punch me out. I mean, I was like, my mind was going in a million different directions. And he took me, and I get emotional when I talk about this, but he hugged me like I'd never been hugged before. And he just said, my brother was an organ donor, and just to see you up there made me feel good today. And that just did something to me, and I'll never forget it.
Absolutely. I could hear it in your voice, and just like with me, you think back on those times, and it just makes you so emotional because you're grateful for life, but you're also so saddened because of somebody, the other life that ended.
Right.
And it's hard to explain that to other people that hasn't gone through that. But it's such a gift, that can never be, you can't put a price tag on, so it's such priceless gift.
And, I want to tell you too, because, like you, I started out with a bad heart, and you start out with a bad heart, and you are one heck of a warrior, my friend. And I will treasure this episode very much, because I think we've had a great conversation, and I feel like, somewhere in life we're brothers now, and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And one last thing that I would like to just put out there on, to encourage. And I don't, if I, it's a Bible verse that's kept me going, and it's one that I think is just very prevalent. And if it's okay, I'd like to share that.
Yes, please do.
All right. It's Jeremiah 29:11. It's something that I even had my in-laws had framed for me, but it's God saying, "For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And that was God's gift. God gives us salvation, but he also furthered that up. And while I'm still here in life and on this earth, he gave me the gift of life through somebody else donating their self to me, and giving me this heart. And so we know that we have a future. He tells us we have a future, and he shows it by giving us the world of transplantation and the gift of organs and organ donation. So I try to tell people every chance I get to seek Lord first, but also make sure you are registered as an organ donor through UNOS, through Donate Life of America, not just, through your driver's license, because sometimes that's not seen as fast as it needs to be seen.
I always tell people,
do all that you can.
Yeah, I always tell people, have that conversation with your family, even though it's not an easy one. Have it with them so they will know your wishes if that time would ever arise. Well, Stephen, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on the podcast. An amazing story, and I wish you nothing but luck and success with you and your entire family for the rest of your journey.
I greatly appreciate it. Thank you so much, BJ, and I look forward to the growth of this podcast and would love to stay in touch and then see how it grows.
Thank you so much, Stephen Grace, for sharing your story with us here on The Gift of Life. Join us next week for another touching episode. If you have a transplant story you'd like to share, reach out to us at giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's giftoflifepodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Facebook, Gift of Life, the Organ Transplant Podcast. And until next time, I'm BJ Odom. Thank you so much for being a part of our journey, reminding us all to appreciate each and every day and to cherish the extraordinary gift of life.